Hey, in this video we're going to go over Chapter 4, the market forces of supply and demand. We're going to ask and seek to answer questions such as how do we identify equilibrium, quantity, and price? What can lead to changing supply or changes in supply? What is a shortage and what is a surplus? And then if demand stays the same, how does the equilibrium, quantity, and price change as supply changes? I want you to keep in mind throughout this course that economics is the study of how society manages its scarce resources. Sometimes that comes with some complicated discussions with different value judgments among different people. Markets bring together groups of buyers and sellers, and these markets are not always structured the same. Some have fixed prices while others have auctions. Sellers supply goods and or services and buyers consume them. When there are multiple different buyers and or sellers, each competes to get what they want at a price they are willing to accept. And there are different levels of competitiveness for markets. In competitive markets, a single entity doesn't impact the price that much. This is in contrast to a monopoly where there's basically one seller of a good, or monopsonies where there's basically one employer who controls or dictates the employee wages in an area. These perfectly competitive markets have two defining requirements. One, goods or services that are offered are identical, so you're not differentiating based off of quality or different features. Buyers and sellers are so numerous that no single one has an undue influence over the market. So when you show up to the store, you don't dictate, hey, I'm going to pay 5 cents for this apple. You have to take the price that the market has collectively decided is acceptable. Things in the future may change as companies take advantages of information about you, where they try to perfectly price discriminate and charge you the maximum they think you personally are willing to take. So yay, I look forward to that. So let's pause the video and read the 3 questions and think through the answers. All right. So for question 1, the answer is C, because a market isn't defined by location or it's defined by its participants. It doesn't have to be an auction. It doesn't have to be the sole location. Question 2, a perfectly competitive market is B. Every seller takes the price of its product as set by the market conditions, because we're not making distinguishments between products in a perfectly competitive market. There can't be effective undercutting, and one single entity doesn't dominate. Question 3, a market for eggs best fits the definition of a perfectly competitive market, since tap water flows from a single source and movies and operating systems differentiate highly. So next we're going to focus on demand. So demand, D, what do we want? Quantity demanded, how much do we want? And the law of demand, other things being equal, ceteris paribus. Quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of a good rises. So figure 1 shows the demand schedule here, this table that shows at this price, this much is demanded. So you're going to demand the most at the lowest price. As this price goes up, 1, 2, all the way to 6, your demand is going to fall. That is why we have a downward sloping demand curve here, where your quantity is here on the x-axis, price is on the y-axis. You're going to demand the least when the price is the highest. You're going to demand the most when the price is the lowest. Hopefully everyone here remembers their graphing from their math courses. So as I showed, as you move further to the right, higher quantities demanded, that corresponds with a lower price. So this quantity demanded at 5, this at 4, and you're going up as you go to the right. This makes sense for normal goods, like if steak doubles in price, you're going to demand fewer steaks. And the market demand is the sum of all market participants' demand. So you can see here an illustration of that. You've got how much Catherine demands at each price, how much Nicholas demands at this price. At each price point, you sum them horizontally. So for this price, this price, this price, they're summed up individually, and then that results in the aggregated market demand curve here. Estimating this can be an important part of market research, which you could do in a future job. Helps you determine if there's a big enough market for the good you may want to sell. You need to know if you can get an appropriate level of return. I'm saying return here rather than profit, because in later chapters 14 and 15 we'll discuss how much profit a company should make, whether you're in a perfectly competitive market or a monopolistic market. So here we move along this static curve where we're just showing at this price and this quantity how much we will demand, Q, or you'll hear me say Q star and P star right here. However, demand preferences can change. So in the 90s, or prior to the 90s, Brussels sprouts you would find would be pretty bitter. They made some advances in learning how to crossbreed varieties, and now the ones you see in the markets aren't so bitter. So preferences have changed. Now more people eat Brussels sprouts than they used to. Figure 3 here shows shifts in demand. So instead of moving along one of these curves, it can shift. So if your base demand right here, D1, is right here, decreases in demand are represented by a left shift, and then an increase in demand will correspond with this right shift. So just imagine if this was your equilibrium price here and your equilibrium quantity here. When you shift here, it's going to be a, well, without the supply graph, it may be hard to tell, but you'll see later on how it results in a lower price when demand increases and a change in quantity. But we'll discuss that soon. So economists break goods down into different groups. So normal goods and luxury goods, and then inferior or Giffen goods. So a normal good, you can see here, all things being equal, whenever income increases, you increase more consumption of that good. For luxury goods, that's even more so true. For inferior goods, the more you make income-wise, you decrease your consumption. So maybe that's ramen noodles. And Giffen goods are a more esoteric concept you can read more about. That's more of a bonus question type thing, where an increase for a particular type of good, increase in price, you may consume more, even though it's an inferior good, but that's because it's a necessity. You may want to think about how that might contradict the law of demand we've discussed so far. Next, we're going to discuss substitutes. So if you go to the store and you see Dr. Pepper has gone up in price, maybe you choose a substitute. Maybe you choose Diet Coke instead. So substitutes are when there's two goods and an increase in one leads to an increase in price of one leads to an increase in demand for the other. That's a substitute. Meanwhile, complements are two goods for which an increase in price of one leads to a decrease in demand for the other. So if the cost of lumber goes up, maybe new construction prices go down. Sometimes people discuss shoelaces and shoes here. So what influences demand or your demand graph curve? So your taste. Some people prefer Pepsi. That's gross. Expectations. So do you forego consumption now because you expect your employment status to change later? Either you make more or you make less. The number of buyers. So as you sum up those demand curves, if more people enter the market demanding that good, you're going to have to sum up more curves and demand goes up. So this all affects the market demand curve, that aggregated curve, and you move along the curve when price or quantity change. Those are on the graph, the y-axis and the x-axis. When a factor not on the graph changes, that's when you shift the curve. See here, this is a graph correlating cigarette sales, which is this dotted line, going down over time against cigarette pack averages cost. So as the cost of cigarettes goes up, demand goes down. So I invite you to consider, what does this show about the relationship between prices and demand for cigarettes? Policymakers have long sought to inspire the populace to reduce their consumption of tobacco. There are plenty of reasons why we want to do this. Improve people's health, it stinks, reduce the impact smoking has on our healthcare system. In future studies, or if you take a policy economics course, you make it into discussions on private marginal cost and benefit versus the social marginal cost and benefit. So we can try to shift the demand curve left to reduce smoking by not allowing movies to portray smokers positively, or not allowing advertising, especially that geared toward young people. But if we can't shift the demand curve left, increasing the price at least moves us along the curve to the left to a lower quantity. In Chapter 5, we'll discuss the term for how much the quantity responds to changes in price, which is a good elasticity. So let's take a moment and pause the video and write down your answers to the quiz questions. I wish I had some Jeopardy theme music I could play right now. Do, 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 do. All right, take a sip of water. Okay, you've paused it. You've done some thinking. Now you're going to answer those questions. So question 4, a change in which of the following will not shift the demand for hamburgers? Well, a change in the price of hamburgers will not shift it because that is on the graph. It's already accounted for in the existing curve. Which of the following will shift the demand curve for pizza to the right? That's going to be A, an increase in the price of hamburgers, which is a substitute for pizza, would shift the demand curve right for pizza. If the price of burgers goes up, you're going to say, yeah, you know what, we can have pizza tonight. Number 6, if pasta is an inferior good, then the demand curve shifts to the left, because or when consumers' income rises, since it's an inferior good, they're like, you know what, we don't have to buy ramen, we can buy something else. So now we're going to focus on supply. This is how much of a good or service a seller provides at a given price. So the law of supply, ceteris paribus, is that the price a seller can get for a good increases. As it increases, the seller is willing to provide more of that good to the market. So we move along the curve as price and quantity change, but we shift to a new curve when something like preferences, or the prices of complements or substitutes or inputs change. So figure 5 in here includes the supply schedule, or the table, as we saw with demand. It's how much is supplied at each price level. And then it shows the upward sloping supply curve. So in contrast to the demand curve that is downward sloping, this is upward sloping because as the price increases, that corresponds to a higher level, a higher quantity supplied. So the market curve is still the sum of the individual supply curves summed horizontally. An individual's supply curve may have a different slope than someone else's because of different preferences. So you can see this one is a steeper climb, this one's more leveled out. Again, you sum them horizontally, and that results in the new market supply curve that may have a different slope than any of the individual curves. So what shifts the supply curve? So those shifts may come from changes in input costs that can result from productivity, like technological changes, changes in other input costs, like an increase in wages, if the minimum wage increases, or maybe a change, lowering of wages during a recession or depression. Maybe there are changes in the number of sellers that contribute to the market curve. More sellers result in changes in supply. And then future expectations or a market strategy. So we've seen examples where companies have flooded the market at low cost, maybe below what it costs them to make a product. They do that to drive existing sellers out of the market, and then once the other sellers have exited the market, they then raise the price up as a monopoly. There have been pushes to make actions like this illegal with varying degrees of success in different places. Let's go ahead and pause the video and take another look at the quick quiz. We've got 3 questions. You have paused it, you have thought about it, you've written down your answer, and now you're excited to hear what was correct. So, which of the following moves the pizza market up along a given supply curve? Well, that's along the curve. So you're looking for price or quantity, an increase in the price of pizza. So it's A. Question B, which of the following shifts the supply curve for pizza to the right? So this is a shift. You're looking for something off the graph. That is C, a decrease in the price of cheese, an input to pizza. And then question 9. Movie tickets and film streaming services are substitutes. If the price of film streaming increases, what happens to the market for movie tickets? The answer is D. The demand curve shifts to the right. That is increase in supply for movies because you're getting priced out of streaming. So now we're going to talk about equilibrium. So that's the situation in which the market has reached the level at which quantity supplied meets quantity demanded. That's the market price where this happens at. So equilibrium price, or P star, the price that balances Q supplied and Q demanded. Equilibrium quantity, or Q star, the quantity supplied at the quantity demanded at the equilibrium price. So the equilibrium is where the supply and demand curves intersect. The downward sloping demand curve, the upward sloping supply curve. Where they intersect is your equilibrium. So your equilibrium quantity here in this example in figure 8 is 7. The equilibrium price is 4. So where the intersection is, where it intersects, the x-axis is that equilibrium Q, then y-axis equilibrium P. So what if the quantity supplied differs from this equilibrium Q? Well, if more is supplied than demanded, there's a surplus. If less is supplied, that's a shortage. These are the difference between quantity supplied and quantity demanded at any given price. So a positive difference is a surplus or excess supply. A negative difference is the shortage or excess demand. The law of supply and demand claims that these shortages or surplus are temporary, since price adjustments in the long run will bring about quantities, supply and demanded back into equilibrium as companies reduce or increase supply or enter or exit the market. So if a storm knocks out the power, do you think there's going to be excess demand or excess supply of power generators? In policy economics courses or later in slide 22, you're going to discuss what actions by the government could help or harm in these situations. What people think about price caps or to prevent price gouging, and then if there is a role for the government like FEMA agencies to bring in generators. So there are 3 steps for predicting changes in equilibrium or the market curve movements. So step 1, decide whether an event impacts supply or demand. 2, evaluate whether this shift is left or right. And then use the supply and demand graph to compare the initial equilibrium with the new one to show how the shift affects the equilibrium price. So shifts in demand, if it gets hotter in the summer, demand shifts right for ice cream, shifts left in the winter for when it gets cooler. Shifts in supply, so quantity supplied versus the supply. Where we're at on the curve is how much is supplied, but supply more broadly is the position, including the slope of the supply curve. The supply curve is your supply. How much is supplied is based on where you're at on the curve. So hot days driving up demand leads to more ice cream supplied, but it doesn't change what the supply could have been. Off the graph changes, like if a virus wipes out cow supply, could shift things in that case to the left. If demand shifts right, say we found out that ice cream cures MS, that will result in a higher equilibrium quantity at a higher price. So our initial demand curve here, D1, the equilibrium quantity was 7 at price 4. Suddenly you've shifted demand because everyone wants to eat ice cream so they don't have MS. You got D2, your new equilibrium intersecting the same supply curve. You've only changed demand, not supply. So more people are demanding it. It's going to be a higher quantity demanded, but that's also going to result in a new higher price because supply didn't change, only demanding more. If supply shifts to the right, so say a new hormone given to cows results in them producing twice as much milk, then this results in a new equilibrium price at a quantity at a lower price. So you have this D1 demand curve, S1 supply curve. The example here is shifting left, what I just said was shifting right. So in this case, you're shifting supply left, so you're going to have less supply. So that results in a new lower quantity demanded and at a higher price. So not happy there. So take a look at this, work through the different examples of if I shift demand right, how does that change things? Left, how does it change things? Just changing D1 left or right. Then another one where you shift just supply left, just supply right. Then check out what happens when you shift demand right and supply right. Demand left, supply right. And vice versa. Do all the different combinations you can do and see how that changes the equilibrium. It can depend on the slope of each of the lines you draw, how much it changes, but you can see the direction it changes. So here we are talking about when an emergency happens. Your emergency has happened. People need something. They need more of something you have. Let's say it's a generator or pallets of bottled water. But you have it because you wanted it. You didn't have any desire to sell, and so you have it, and people offering you money for it, but you didn't want to sell it. You wanted to have it. That's why you bought it to begin with. Are they entitled to your possessions at a certain price just because they want it? You don't want to sell it, but hey, they keep offering you higher and higher prices. Eventually, it's going to come to a price maybe where you say, you know what, I'd rather have that much money than this extra generator or this extra water, even though you bought it because of the risk of not having it yourself. So when this happens, when you sell it for this higher price, this higher market price, there are going to be people that are mad at you for price gouging. But were they entitled to your possession at the price they dictate? If you'd offered it at a cheaper price, it would have sold out immediately. How would you have decided who got it? You wouldn't have it, even though you wanted it, and even though you valued it higher than the price you sold it at. Really what you get there is people say, well, good job for selling something you wanted to keep at a low price. That one person is now happy, and no one else is. So how do you handle the situation? Is there an ethical answer here? Is there an academic answer here? How do people feel about maybe only the wealthy people were able to afford it? Economists, especially policy economists like me, love to discuss these issues academically. Unfortunately, the typical layperson is more likely to react emotionally rather than have an academic discussion, and this can lead to discussions on what the role the government could or should or shouldn't play, and then the direct and indirect effects of those policies. We're going to continue this and we'll come back to the quiz. So when that price skyrockets for the, let's say it was a generator, you know, other people from outside the disaster area may say, hey, generators are selling for $5,000 more right now. I can rent a U-Haul for a few $100. Go buy, you know, $2,000 generators, drive it all the way down there, sell them at $5,000 a piece, make a profit. I'm happy because I made profit. They're happy because they had access to generators they didn't have access to before. But there are going to be people who complain about price gouging. So the government will be pressured to set price caps, making it illegal to charge above a certain level. One of the problems with that is that if they set a price cap, you may say, well, I'm not going to drive down there and do all this effort and to not make any money. I've got other things to do with my time. I've got other ways I need to make my rent. So that is going to create a shortage. So then how do we want to handle this situation as a civilized, community? Some would say that's a role the government can play. So have an agency like FEMA that can help bring in equipment to an area. Other people don't like the government interfering. Other states where these disasters don't happen may not want to feel like they're subsidizing those other states that may get hit by hurricanes more frequently. So let's pause the video and look at the quick quiz. We've got questions 10 through 13. So pause it. Okay, you're back. Question 10. The discovery of a large new reserve of crude oil will shift the supply curve for gasoline, leading to a lower equilibrium price, which is B. If the economy goes into recession and incomes fall, what happens in the markets for inferior goods? Well, both prices and quantities are both going to rise as people buy more ramen instead of steak, so that's going to be A. Which of the following might lead to an increase in the equilibrium price of jelly and a decrease in the equilibrium price of quantity, equilibrium quantity of jelly sold? Well, we're going to look for things that shift supply left. So that's going to be C, an increase in the price of grapes, because that's an input for jelly. And 13, an increase in demand will cause a movement along a given supply curve, which is called a change in quantity supplied, which is D, because changes in supply are shifts in the supply curve. Changes in quantity supplied are movement along the curve. So hopefully this chapter has given you some things to think about and showed you how we can discuss some complex societal questions through the lens of economics, because again, it's about figuring out how to distribute scarce resources. These are the key concepts that you should be thinking about. If you want to prepare yourself, make sure you're thinking through these things. Look through the questions for review, and let me know if you have questions you want to discuss. So that was chapter 4. Remember, a shift in the supply curve is a change in supply. A shift in the demand curve is a change in demand. But a movement along a fixed supply curve is a change in the quantity supplied. And a movement along the fixed demand curve is a change in the quantity demanded. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that.